Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Moodboard Podcast. This is episode 13, and this is Caesar,
And this is Aaron.
and we are two creatives doing meaningful, insightful conversations to help you unlock your creative potential. And today we'll be talking about an assortment of creative topics, and we are gonna touch on a little bit of AI, which has been making more headlines on the news, and in regards of how some big companies are responding to this new technology. And then also we're gonna touch on some books, and we're gonna touch on some of Aaron's recent activities that has sparked some creative thoughts. And I would like to hear more about your vacation, Aaron.
Yeah, so this past week, I got a chance to spend some time with my family in Asheville, North Carolina. And it was really cool to get a chance to see the Biltmore mansion or estate. While I was taking the tour, if you haven't been to the Biltmore, it's one of the largest, if not the largest, I think it's a chateau or some kind of mansion in the United States, and it has a very rich historical past. In fact, during World War II, the National Gallery of Art chose it as a place to safeguard the art that in that museum for safekeeping during that time. And so there's a lot of rich history there. And I think one of the things that stood out to me during the visit, this was actually my second time visiting after 10 years. I remember being really impressed back then, but now I think with time, I've been able to appreciate it a lot more. And it's really a testament to what wealth and good design can accomplish. And I got a chance to see just a beautiful library, beautiful architecture, a lot of innovative solutions for washing clothes during this, what is known as the Gilded Age. And so a lot of the amenities that this place had were state of the art during that time. I was really inspired by the library, for example, which had about like 20,000 books in it. I believe that the guy, George Vanderbilt, who was the one that commissioned this place, he was 26 when he did it. And he
No way.
collaborated, he collaborated with a architect. I believe his name was, I think I'm forgetting the name, but he was a well-known architect during the time, and they collaborated on every detail of this place. Doorknobs to the doors to the furniture inside of each room. It was really incredible to see what could be accomplished with that vision.
And I really enjoy these kind of trips because it makes you go back in time, and it makes you wonder what was going through their minds. And I think it exposes you to new ways of thinking because you are going there with a different lens. And it makes you reimagine what that kind of thinking would get you today. Because for them, this was like, okay, this is like a blank canvas type of project. What could this become? What can it be? Like, how can we do things better? So it's very re-energizing going to these kind of places, being exposed to this kind of space, the objects around it. And I think it triggers, who would have thought, an old place, new idea.
Yeah, that's a really great way. I think it's that spirit that is so just typical American in that time, where it's a new a relatively new country. People are still, how would you say, there's a lot of that entrepreneurial spirit. It's fresh. It's anyone with a dream and resources, ambition, or whatnot can create anything that their imagination is the limit. It
Mm.
really inspired me to see just how this George Vanderbilt. So George Vanderbilt inherited a lot of his wealth from his grandfather, if I recall correctly, who made his wealth, I think, supplying railroad. You'll have to do some research there, but the grandfather really, it started with him, and that desire and that ambition to want to create something. And I just find that very inspiring because I've been going through this historical kick. In the past episode, we talked about Benjamin Franklin and like the original sort of American spirit, like the thing that started the country, that sense that it's almost like there is no previous American to reference. There's no previous thing. Like, you're starting a new country, you're starting a new culture, and there's just the spirit of anything is possible, right? Like any
Yeah,
person
an
can,
uncharted territory.
exactly. And to see this estate and just witness the care and the craft that goes into building something with no sort of no limitation. And I believe that everyone who worked on it, this was, I guess, new at the time, or it was every person who worked, that didn't matter the color of their skin, they were all paid, and everyone who worked there was paid. And so it was the family was very good with the people who helped them build it. And so now there's a rich history behind it, and now it's open to the public, and people can go and really witness this enormous, like, just a beautiful space that has rooms for everything. They have these rooms for artists, and I took a lot of video, and I'm working on a video for the YouTube channel to give people a little bit of a glimpse. I'm sure there's videos out there, but I wanted to focus on a little bit more on the design details of the space. But very inspiring for sure.
That makes me think a lot about when you go to these places and you see the objects and the things they were surrounded by. I'm sure, like, a lot of the approach and a lot of the things that were done at that time were like very simple or just functional. And I believe, like, in a way, I'm sure back then you had a lot of limitations, like limited resources, limited like knowledge, expertise, limited tools, and you have to be resourceful. And I believe that those constraints were the perfect recipe for creating meaningful or impactful design products. And I believe that's as like the book that you have mentioned, Just Enough Design, it just makes me think of, wow, all those constraints were like positive thing because it made you focus on a solution that worked, versus now a common issue with products or with the experiences is that they're like maybe a little bit too much, maybe a little bit overwhelmed. And it's because I feel in the design process we have a lot of choices and we have access to a lot of images, access to a lot of ideas, access to making a lot of prototypes, which is not a bad thing as long as we know how to curate it, as we mentioned before, an important skill to nurture. So that lack of curation has turned into, let's put everything we design into one and we'll just deliver that product as it is with all those features that are gonna overwhelm the user at the end, the consumer. I wanted to explore a little bit this topic of the products and experiences that you were exposed to in that space that you visited, and did they feel like there was just enough design, just enough input to make it a workable product versus the type of products we see today that are being created today?
Yeah, I think there was a different type of, you know, it was very of its time in terms of aesthetics. It was very ornate. It was very telling of its time, and looking at the chairs, the textiles, the objects. There are certain things that have stayed the same, like the kitchen, the way things were stored, the gym. That you can start to see the evolution or the beginning of objects. Like you're seeing the great grandfathers of the objects that we have now. And so that was very interesting to witness, because you're seeing the things that belong to a very wealthy family, right? And you begin to get a sense of how important and curating the objects that are around you in your space truly is for each specific room. For example, some of these rooms for the guests, for the artists that were visiting the space, they were called artist rooms, because you were assigned a room based on what class you were in, or like what social status you had. And so the restrooms were just the toilet and the bathtub. And during this time, the sink, what we know as like the sink now, place where you go brush your teeth and wash your face and that sort of thing, that was found on the outside. And with all of this, it got me thinking about what this Swedish philosopher, whose name is Ellen Key, she was from the 18th century, and she has a wonderful essay that actually I have a book that I've just been reunited with called Beauty in the Home. And what she argued is that if you want to change society, you have to start with what's inside your home. That means that you need to be very mindful of the objects that you introduce to your home, the books that you have in each room, because the kids who are growing up inside these homes are being exposed to beautiful furniture.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be, she doesn't talk about beauty as like expensive luxe kind of thing. She's talking about very practical objects, honest objects, things that are handmade, handcrafted, and that are very functional and are organized and that sort of thing. And getting to see that at the level of peak wealth, and thinking about how that affected these people and their sort of family legacy, and how would you say, their dynasty, if you will, because the family who built it, the last name Vanderbilt, lives on. In fact, I don't know if you've seen the reporter Anderson Cooper from CNN. He is a descendant of this family. So this family still has influential people in our society. And so that name lives on. And going back to that book about the Just Enough Design, he talks about Japanese culture and the way the Japanese have a philosophy, which is the hodo, which is the just enough design. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing that, but if you want to get a good glimpse of this, I think checking out the Perfect Days is a really good, in my opinion, a really good exposure to that, because you get to see, if you haven't been to Japan, which I haven't been yet.
Me neither.
And it's just that attitude towards organization, cleanliness, and design it trickles out into society. And one way that I see that in this film is the bathroom design. If you're in New York,
Oh, wow.
if you're in New York and you're trying to look for a restroom, good luck. Like, there is somebody out there who started a TikTok account or some Instagram reel account, and I forget the name. Oh, Got to Go NYC or something like that. But this person basically tells you where you can go use the restroom. That's how tricky the situation to finding a restroom in New York City is. And meanwhile in Japan, their public restrooms are beautifully designed. And so all of this, I'm thinking about all of this and thinking, man, why do the wealthy tend to only be the ones that are like really enjoying great design during this time? Why is it that it's so expensive to produce great design for people? Like Charles Eames had that one quote, the best for the most for the least. And I love that philosophy. Charles Eames, these chairs are worth like what, $5,000? Which I'm sure he meant well, but the companies who create his things, they're very expensive. And so
Yeah.
it inspires me a lot seeing this level of wealth, because it's, dude, how do we as designers create, and then this is what gets me excited about Yeezy, for example, and the pod and the shoes that the philosophy that Ye had about making everything $20, and that sort of attitude of like, how can we like bring the best for the least, because that'll change our society.
Totally. I believe that. And since we're talking about just enough design, the book, which I think it's important for us to live within means in a positive way, or to live within, or for us to gauge, well, like, okay, what is just enough? Not too little, not too much. What is just enough? Finding that gauge for each of us. And I think for each of us that looks differently what just enough is. But if we can all do our due diligence to find our just enough gauge limit, it's important, because I feel like when we design just enough, it gives us, like, just enough allows to bring things to life, rather than chasing or like looking for this perfect, or waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for the perfect product for us to feel like, oh yes, we need to make it now. But not necessarily. I think when something is good enough, I think it's a good sign that it can live out there. And also I wanted to bring up, I just watched last week, I bought again the documentary Objectified on Amazon Prime Video. And I remember watching that documentary at SCAD, I think when it came out.
Yeah.
The industrial design faculty, they had a showing for the documentary. I think this was 2008.
Yeah. Sounds right.
So anyway, they showcased the documentary in school, and I was in my early days of industrial design, so of course it was very insightful, very inspiring, very cool.
Yeah.
But now that I'm watching that what? Now 8 years later, 7 years later, I'm watching that. No, actually more. Sorry, more. 14 years again. Later, 40 years later. I'm watching that, and I'm like, wow, this documentary, this film is so relevant still, because I feel like we are dealing with the same challenges. We're dealing with the same same challenges. We're trying to address the same issue. And it was refreshing for me to see it again, because it truly reinforced and made me remember why I'm here, what I'm doing. It helped me like retune all my gauges of like, okay, what am I doing here? And I think it's important for, especially now, because back then when that came out, a lot of the talk was around consumerism and like mass production, and they touched on waste and recycling and the level of we are consuming faster, or yeah, we're consuming faster, but also like throwing away
Yeah.
throwing things away faster. So
Yeah.
it's this like very out of proportion behavior that it's gonna affect us in the near
Yeah.
future. It's gonna affect future generations. It's gonna affect how we consume what we consume. It's gonna limit what we consume. So I think having those wake up call moments to like, oh wow, let's really rethink what we're doing, and like
Sure.
hopefully goes beyond like our responsibility, but it just becomes everyone's
Yeah.
mission, or at least something that you're aware of that you can in some way contribute. So that's something I would like to invite everyone to watch, and really worth buying that film. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like $14, so
Yeah.
truly worth it.
Man,
No, go ahead.
that idea of for example, the United States, it benefits so much from, in contrast to maybe let's say Japan, that's an island, right? And so the attitude towards things are different. Look at cars that are popular in the south of the United States, big trucks. Some people use it for their work, and some people just like the aesthetic of it, that kind of thing. Compared to maybe like Italy, where it's just like small cars, compact cars, because the streets are historic and narrow, and you need to the design of the vehicles to work in that environment. And it's this sort of thought of, if it breaks, that's fine, I'll just go buy another one. It's going to require a lot of educating the public, educating people in the design process. I always find it very difficult to throw away things, and you have to find a balance between, okay, can I give this a second life, or is it time to part ways with it?
Mhm.
And from just knowing how many resources and processes are involved in the creation of things, not everyone has that luxury of having that education. And I think it's a responsibility on us to share it with our friends who are non-designers, or share it with family members, or that sort of thing, to really learn a little bit from other cultures. Like, for example, in this book, Just Enough Design, the designer that writes these essays talks about designing this bottle for, I believe it was a sauce or some kind of liquid bottle. And the way they designed this bottle is so that even when it's empty, it's beautiful and it can be used as a vase. And so it finds a second life. There is a second purpose for it once its first purpose is extinguished. And so having this attitude toward things, and knowing that even though we have space, and even though we are blessed to have resources to produce things, whether it's physically or digitally, we have to be mindful of its impact after its use, and realizing that our relationship with each other, both as a designer and a person who is a user, consumer, is not the only relationship. It's also like our relationship with the planet and the resources that we have, and what we are leaving behind for future generation. And I think this is a good way to segue into that topic of AI, Caesar. Like, things were manufactured in the days of Lowy and those OG designers, they were just like creating plastics, and they weren't really thinking about sustainability. The economy was booming, and etc. They were just going for it. They were not thinking of the repercussions of the materials that they were choosing. I wonder now if companies it almost feels like a rat race to implement artificial intelligence into their products, and they're not really thinking it through. And I mean this from just like a user experience perspective, not even like a moral one.
I think companies have to be careful about the incorporation of AI, because it could create an experience that is supposed to be like simple, straightforward. It could become annoying. Well, hey, I just want to buy something. I just want to buy this. I don't want to have a conversation with AI about what would you like to do? What would you like to consider our products? I don't want that. I just want to buy a product. I'm just trying to buy a pack of gum.
Dude, my brain already does that for me. I don't need my computer to be asking me all these questions as well.
We already have AI in our brains.
Is it AI, organic intelligence?
Yeah. And I think it would be funny if we see in the future like the equivalent of what we see today in the food industry with produce, where you see like non-GMO.
Yeah.
What do we see in the future like non-AI? And like this is like farm to table type of thing. This is from human to human.
From humans, yeah.
No human, no.
YouTube and Instagram are already starting to have these labels on the content where it's like made with, you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're like made with AI. I think it would be really interesting to start having like made with just organic intelligence. It's just made by human,
made by humans for humans.
Some kind of label there. I'm very excited by companies like Nintendo, for example, who are saying no thanks to generative AI. And Nintendo's always had that rebellious streak to them. Like if you recall back to when the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 were coming out, they were in the fastest processors, the greatest and latest graphics. And Nintendo was like, actually, we're going to do the Wii, which has basic graphics, but it introduces this new controller that makes the gaming experience a totally different one. And that's the we're going to take. And I always admire companies that do that.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the Wii was very physical oriented. The motions and everything was like with your body. Because usually you see video games very stagnant, where you just sit on the couch, just move your thumbs, and that's it. So I like that Nintendo plays the long game.
Yeah, I agree.
If it takes, Wii is not, I'm sure it's like not the sharpest tool in the shed, but it was what it took to prepare the people mentally for the Switch. And remember the Wii that came out that was like a Switch, and you like had a docking station for the Wii with the screen. I think that was like the Switch, but in not even infant stages. Like, I don't know. It was like, I don't know. It was the thought of the Switch before the Switch becoming the Switch.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of companies are still, let's say, the equivalent of like in boxing, you have shadow boxing, which is like not fighting. You're just like training your body, your muscles, and your movement, whatever. So I feel like a lot of companies are stuck shadow boxing. We're like, oh, we're just going to play safe. I really don't want to fight. I really don't want to lose. And I feel like Nintendo with the Wii and all of that, which wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't like I didn't have a Wii, but I have a Switch. So I
Yeah.
feel like that stepping stone for the Switch was important. And I feel like the Switch, to be honest, I don't know how they how can you like top off the Switch, the Nintendo Switch? Like, how can you make it better? Besides improving the sensors or like improving, let's say, like battery life or screen quality, what else can you do beyond that? I think it's a very 99.9 perfect product, in my opinion.
Dang, that's solid. That's solid. I think it comes down to that you want to work in designing the things that you love, like things that you already love. I picked up this book by I forget who the author is, but he's writing about the legacy and the notes and the thinking of Iwata. I forget his last name, but he was the CEO of Nintendo for a while. He's now passed away. The wisdom that is inside this book is quite extraordinary. And one thing that really struck me was that he mentions that he's not really any, he's, first of all, he's a gamer. That's what he is.
Mhm.
And I think that love for the thing that actually brings joy to people, product, distinguished. And I think it ties
Mhm.
back to something that Steve Jobs said, where he said how they don't start with the technology, they start with the customer experience, and then they work from that. They work back from that. And I think a lot of what's happening right now with companies is that they're in this rat race to catch up with each other or not be left out or not look like they're falling behind, or investors are pressuring them. When are you going to implement AI? When are you going to implement this? That they're just rushing towards, a half-baked solution and not really taking the time to think about it, because it does take time. It does take time to create products that are meaningful, that are actually useful. And one thing that confuses me is, and maybe it's because Open, who created ChatGPT, is so far advanced or has a current grip on the latest AI technology, is that all of these companies who are implementing AI into their products are basically using their OpenAI's API. So they're implementing AI into their products, but they're actually training something that is not does not belong to them. They're basically training
Mm.
something. They're using their product. They're outsourcing their product's core features to another company, which makes no sense to me. And I guess it's because it's not easy to create these models or these AIs. Very few people are truly experts in this and understand how they work and can build one from the ground up. So I don't know, like it sounds very strange for companies like Apple, for example, who are very like tight about the end user experience, to implement that into their product. But then again, if you look back in time, they remember, I don't know if you remember this, but before the iPhone, Apple, Motorola, to create the rocker phone, implemented iTunes to the Motorola phone, and when they did that, they noticed that it really sucked, and so that's why they were just like, oh, we got to make something that's way better than this. So I'm wondering
Yeah, we
if,
gotta do.
yeah, exactly.
No, I was just gonna say, you have to fail before you succeed, and you have to be willing to take risks when you're like innovating or trying to create something groundbreaking. Take risks. It might fail. I hope it doesn't, but it might fail, and you have to be okay with that outcome. And then being able to like reassess, learn, and create something better from that point in time. Like as you said, I'm sure they felt like, oh no, we need to create like our own hardware. And that's what the realization that on Objectified, there was a realization, one of the guys that invented like the first laptop or something, or portable computer, the first portable computer, there, he even says it like, oh, I came to realization that I went from when you're creating like electronics with screens and all of that. He says that, oh yeah, I made this portable computer with all these features, but once I started using the product, I realized that everything that mattered was behind the screen. And that's what became interaction design. And then they also say in the documentary, like in interaction design goes beyond the screen. It's like how you interact with all your senses with a product. And those are the type of questions and thoughts and things that we have to keep in mind when we create a product. And also
Yeah.
what's really meaningful. And also, again, finding balance, which
Yeah.
I think the Nintendo Switch is a perfect balance of analog and digital. Like enough analog experience that it doesn't feel like it limits you, but also the enough digital experience that it doesn't feel that it takes away from the analog aspect of the Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
So it's a great case study that we can use for future, for reference and for future product creation.
Yeah. I think that there's two schools of thought here. If, for example, if you use Nintendo and Microsoft and Sony, who create the Xbox and the PlayStation, Microsoft and Sony are competing against each other, where Nintendo is competing against itself. And of course it competes in the gaming market, in that they have a very strong point of view, and that's, I think, what's required for great design to manifest itself, is to have a very strong point of view and opinion on what the future should be. And that's, I think, what's, in my opinion, lacking from a lot of these companies that are quickly implementing AI without any serious thought to it. And I can give a few examples lately that have made headlines. I think one of them, I want to talk about the Adobe case, but just before I get into that, speaking of software, Figma announced that they were doing AI, finally implemented fully into the product. And that caused some controversy when someone generated some design for a weather app that looked they resembled too closely the designs that Apple had in their weather app. And so soon after, from what I know, turned off the feature, or I'm not sure what exactly happened, but they backtracked and they're trying to fix it or whatnot, to get it to a place where it worked without controversy. And then yesterday I was browsing, and someone was showing their work and how Adobe had basically taken the models that they had created and implemented it into something that they were now selling on their store or something like this. And so the whole sort of creative community has this giant migration toward other software like Affinity to replace these Adobe products like Photoshop and Illustrator and the rest of the Creative Cloud. And so it's almost as if these companies are just forcing their communities to accept that this is the future and this is the way it's going to be, or else find some other to use. And the community is responding, the creative community is responding, and okay, we'll move on. And I personally have started also like switching software, not so much because I'm anti AI or Like, I just don't think that the implementation that they've done so far is the right approach. Like, AI should not be, it should be another tool in the art. It should be a way to the less creative tasks like naming layers or expediting title generations, those kinds of things that are actually really useful.
Organizing your folders.
Exactly. Please organize my desktop. Not really like replacing the creative process. Can you imagine, Caesar? What's fun about? Oh, I was going to go back to the school of thought. There's the artists, there's the designers who understand the design process and who understand the importance of things taking time to be made. And then there's the school of thought that is just like, don't you just want to just have the final thing in front of you? No, you don't understand. There is a process to this. The process is, it's not, how do you say, it's not meant to be rushed. We have to take our time with each step because that's what leads to insights. That's what leads to new take. That's what leads to, that's why that's what got me into this game. You never know what's going to happen.
Totally.
It surprises
Yeah,
you.
no, these are great questions and observations to always keep in mind, because it is important just for everyone, and especially for the reason of this podcast being here is questioning and what we're doing, what everyone else is doing, and hopefully we can help trigger the right thoughts, and hopefully it leads you to creating, I don't know, something meaningful, or it leads to meaningful outcomes. And we would like to wrap it up this episode, and we really enjoyed talking about what Aaron did in his vacation and how visiting old places can help you trigger new thoughts. And we enjoyed talking about just enough design, talking about the perfect balance of analog and digital, and how innovation requires failure for you to make path or make way for the actual good idea. And we really enjoyed this time, and we look forward to next week and bringing you really good content. And again, we're open to suggestions, comments, and feel free to share this podcast with friends or people that will benefit from this. And we look forward to having you next week. This was episode 13. This is the Moodboard Podcast. This is Caesar.
And this is Aaron.
And we are two people having meaningful, insightful conversations to help you unlock your creative potential. See you next week.